Welcome to Suri Cheating Story, where we share true stories of betrayal in love. Our channel brings heartfelt, real-life experiences from those who have endured the pain of infidelity. Whether you're facing challenges in your own relationship or seeking to better understand the complexities of love and trust, Suri Cheating Story is the place for you. Subscribe now to explore the emotional depths in the path to healing with us. Suri's eyes snapped open, the harsh light of the sterile room cutting through the fog in her mind. A sharp, pulsating pain shot through her head, sending her body into a frozen state. She tried to move, but every inch of her felt foreign, heavy, disconnected, as if she was trapped in someone else's body. The faint, rhythmic beep of the machines monitoring her heart was the only sound in the unnerving silence, and with each pulse, she became more acutely aware of the disorienting emptiness that surrounded her. Her lungs burned as she struggled to take a full breath, the air thick and cold, almost suffocating. Where was she? How had she ended up here? Her chest tightened with a growing panic, and she forced her eyes to focus, willing the room to make sense. But the harsh white walls and unfamiliar faces only added to her confusion. A soft voice reached her ears, but it felt distant, like it was coming from somewhere far away. "Are you in any pain, Suri?" Suri blinked, the voice cutting through the haze in her mind. She tried to speak, but her throat felt like sandpaper. "Where am I?" Her voice trembled, weak and lost, as the reality of her situation began to sink in. "What happened to me?" The woman in front of her, a nurse perhaps, seemed to hesitate before responding, her words calm but filled with an undertone of caution. "You're in the hospital, Suri. You've just woken up from a coma." A coma. The word crashed into her like a tidal wave, pulling her under with the force of its meaning. She tried to grasp at the threads of her memory, but it was like trying to catch smoke with her bare hands. Blankness. Nothing. "How long?" she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. The nurse hesitated, the weight of the answer hanging in the air. 3 months, she finally said, her voice steady but filled with something Suri couldn't read. "You've been unconscious for 3 months." 3 months? The thought felt impossible, a cruel twist of time she couldn't make sense of. And yet, the blankness in her mind, the confusion in her limbs, seemed to confirm it. "Why am I pregnant?" The question left her lips before she could stop it, the words heavy with a disbelief that made her stomach churn. She hadn't even felt the baby. She couldn't fathom how it was possible. The nurse's expression shifted, a flicker of something crossing her face before she masked it. "It's okay, Suri. Everything's okay." She paused, then added, "The pregnancy is fine. We've been monitoring it the whole time you were here. It seems the fall didn't affect the baby." Suri's mind was reeling, but before she could process any of it, the door opened quietly. She turned her head, her gaze blurry, and saw a familiar face. Chris. He stepped into the room, his eyes filled with relief and guilt. And for a moment, her heart skipped. But there was something strange about the way he looked at her, something she couldn't quite place. Suri blinked rapidly, trying to shake the fog from her mind. She looked at Chris, her heart racing as the pieces of the puzzle didn't fit. He was standing there watching her with a mixture of relief and sorrow, but there was something in his eyes, something that made her stomach twist in a way she couldn't understand. "Chris?" Her voice came out shaky, weak, like a whisper she barely recognized as her own. How did I get here?" His jaw tightened and he stepped closer, his hand hesitating in midair, as if he wanted to touch her, but didn't know how. "You had an accident," he said softly, but the words didn't match the tension in his expression. "You fell, Suri. It was bad. I found you lying there." "Fell?" Her mind spun, trying to connect the dots. She couldn't remember any of it. The fall, the hospital, even the faces around her felt foreign. The words felt like they belonged to someone else, as if they didn't make sense in the context of her reality. "What happened to me?" "You hit your head really hard," Chris said, his voice tight with emotion. "They said it was a miracle you woke up at all." Suri's heart hammered in her chest. It didn't feel like a miracle. It felt like a nightmare, a world where she couldn't even remember her own body. Her thoughts spiraled as she tried to focus. "What? About the baby?" she asked, her voice trembling as the word echoed in her mind. "Baby? She was pregnant?" Chris's expression softened, and for a moment she thought she saw something more in his eyes, something deeper than concern. But it was gone in an instant. He gave a small, strained smile. The baby's doing fine. The doctors have been monitoring it. It's a miracle. The fall didn't hurt it. A flood of emotions rushed over her. Confusion, fear, anger, disbelief. How was this possible? She couldn't remember the last few months. She couldn't even remember how she had gotten here. And yet the word baby clung to her like a weight she couldn't escape. Her heart pounded in her chest. Am I really pregnant? She whispered, the shock of it sinking in deeper. How is that even possible? Suri's chest tightened as Chris's words hung in the air. How could this be happening? The more she thought about it, the more her mind reeled. Everything felt wrong, like she was living in a world that didn't belong to her, a nightmare she couldn't escape from. Chris. What happened? She whispered, her voice barely audible, the weight of her confusion settling over her like a dark cloud. How did I fall? Why don't I remember any of it? Chris's face faltered for a moment, his hand reaching for hers but then pulling back as if unsure. You fell down the stairs, he said quietly, his voice heavy with something Suri couldn't quite place. I found you unconscious at the bottom. You were hurt pretty badly. Suri's pulse quickened. Fell down the stairs. But that didn't make sense. She tried to focus, trying to grasp at the fragments of memory that seemed just out of reach, but all she could feel was a terrifying blankness. Who was with me? She asked, her voice shaking with an urgency she couldn't hide. Was anyone else there? Chris hesitated, his eyes darting toward the door, where a figure stood, an officer dressed in dark blue, a look of quiet determination on his face. His presence filled the room with a strange tension, and Suri felt a chill creep up her spine. Miss Weston, the officer said softly, stepping forward. I'm Detective Simmons. I'm investigating the incident. I know you're recovering, but I need to ask you a few questions. Suri's stomach dropped. Her head was still foggy. Her thoughts scattered, but she instinctively knew something wasn't right. There was something more to this than just an accident, something that didn't add up. The officer continued, his gaze hardening as he focused on her. We believe someone may have deliberately pushed you down the stairs, Miss Weston, and from the evidence we have, we suspect the person who found you, the man named Lewis, might be involved. Suri's heart raced. Lewis! Her mind struggled to connect the name with a face, but she couldn't recall who he was. Had someone pushed her? The idea made her stomach churn. Why would someone hurt her? She looked at Chris, her eyes searching his face, but his expression was unreadable. She didn't know what to believe anymore. She didn't know who she could trust. Suri's heart raced as the detective's words echoed in her mind, each one sinking deeper like a blade twisting in her chest. Someone pushed me? The idea was almost too much to bear. Her head swam with confusion, the darkness of memory refusing to let her see the truth clearly. And yet, there was a weight behind the detective's words, something urgent, something that made her feel like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, teetering between the unknown and the truth. Her gaze shifted back to Chris, the man who had always been her constant, her anchor in a world that often felt chaotic. But now, even his familiar presence seemed to hold 1,000 secrets. There was something in his eyes, an unease, a flicker of guilt, that made her stomach tighten. Chris? Suri's voice broke, her throat dry as she tried to speak the words that had been clawing at her for days. You didn't push me, did you? His face froze for a moment. Then he looked away, his jaw tightening. Of course not. Suri, you know I would never hurt you. His voice was steady, but there was a nervous edge to it. She wanted to believe him. She really did. But the doubt in her mind gnawed at her, threatening to swallow everything she thought she knew. The detective stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied both of them. Miss Weston, he began, we believe someone with personal feelings for you may have been involved. Do you remember anyone who might have had a motive to hurt you? Suri blinked, trying to piece together the fragments of her fractured memory. The name Lewis floated to the surface, but it was still a blur, just a shadow of someone she couldn't quite place. But there was a sharp, unmistakable pang in her chest. Lewis. The name felt wrong, too familiar, too close. The detective noticed her reaction. Do you know a Lewis? He asked, his voice probing, calm yet intense. Suri nodded slowly, her breath catching in her throat. Lewis, her mind filled with pieces of a past she hadn't yet fully remembered. She remembered the glances, the quiet way he looked at her whenever Chris was around, the strange tension between them. He had always seemed friendly enough, but there was something off about him, something that made her feel uncomfortable at times, like he was hiding something more than just friendship. He's always been around, Suri whispered, her voice barely audible. But I don't know. Something about him, something felt wrong. The detective exchanged a look with Chris, his expression unreadable. What do you remember about him? Anything that might explain why he could be involved in this? Suri's mind swirled. She tried to reach for the memories, but they slipped through her fingers like smoke. There was a fog in her brain, a wall she couldn't break through. But then it hit her. Lewis had always wanted more. He had always looked at her like he wanted something from her, something that wasn't just friendship. And Chris, he had always seemed to know that. He had been protective of her, distant with Lewis, almost as though he could sense the undercurrent of tension. He loved me, Suri murmured, as if she were just now realizing it herself. He always loved me, and I didn't know. The room went still, as though time itself had paused. Suri's heart pounded in her chest, her pulse racing with the crushing weight of the realization. Lewis had feelings for me. He always had, but I was blind to it. And now, she feared it was too late. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but they brought with them a haunting truth. Could Lewis have hurt me? Suri's mind raced as the realization hit her with the force of a freight train. Her breath hitched, her body trembling as the fog in her memories began to lift, piece by piece. The face of Lewis, his quiet intensity, the way he'd always been too attentive, too close, flashed in her mind like a series of broken snapshots. It all clicked, the pieces aligning in an uncomfortably clear image. The chill of dread swept over her, a coldness that started at the base of her spine and spread outward. It was him. The very thought of it made her stomach churn, but she couldn't deny the truth any longer. Lewis had pushed her down the stairs. He had to have. Her chest tightened with horror as she recalled the conversation they'd had not long before the accident. The one where she had told him she was keeping the baby. He had been angry, so much angrier than she had ever seen him, his face twisted in frustration. He couldn't accept it. She had refused his suggestion, the one he had been pressuring her about for weeks, to end the pregnancy. She had told him that she couldn't, that she wouldn't. The memory hit her like a slap. Lewis had been silent for a long time after that, but his eyes, those cold, empty eyes, had betrayed a darker emotion. And now, looking back, she saw it all clearly. The jealousy, the quiet resentment that had built up behind his seemingly caring gestures. He hadn't been interested in her happiness or her safety. He had only wanted control. "You don't have to do this," Lewis had told her, his voice tight, his hands shaking. "I'm just trying to help you. We could fix this. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." She remembered the way he had tried to coax her, to persuade her, as though it was her duty to obey him. But she had stood firm. She had told him she was going to have the child, and that was the moment things had changed. That was the moment he had snapped. The violent memory flooded her senses. The cold air, the sudden force that slammed her down, the unmistakable feeling of her body being shoved, then falling. Falling, until everything went black. The moment she had lost her memory, the moment her life had spiraled out of control. Suri's breath came in sharp gasps as she stared at Chris, her eyes wide with the weight of the truth. It was him. Lewis did this. He pushed me. He wanted me to lose the baby. Chris's face paled, his eyes widening with disbelief and horror as he processed her words. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Suri's hands shook as she tried to steady herself. "I remember now," she whispered, barely able to hold it together. "He did this. He's the one who hurt me." The room was thick with tension, suffocating under the weight of Suri's discovery. And in that moment, with the truth finally out, she knew everything had changed. She wasn't just fighting for her life anymore. She was fighting for her future, for the child she had chosen to keep, and for the justice she would make sure Lewis would never escape. The room felt suffocating as Suri's words hung in the air. She could feel the weight of the truth crashing down on her like a tidal wave. She had known deep down that something had been wrong with Lewis. But now, standing on the precipice of this reality, the pain in her chest felt sharper than any wound. "I can't believe it," Chris whispered, his voice cracked, as if he too were struggling to comprehend the depth of betrayal. How could he, how could anyone do something like that? Suri didn't have an answer. All she knew was that the man who had once been her confidant, the person who had seemed to care for her, had turned into someone unrecognizable. He had been so close to her, and yet his intentions had been laced with dark desires, control, power, and an unhealthy obsession with forcing her to follow his path. But even as she was consumed with this suffocating sorrow, something in her began to shift. The anger, though sharp and raw, was starting to give way to clarity. The truth had a brutal way of exposing everything. And now Suri knew what she had to do. "I need to go to the police," she said, her voice steady but firm. "We need to make sure he's stopped. He can't hurt anyone else." Chris looked at her, his face a mixture of concern and admiration. "Suri, you're sure about this?" Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Yes," she said, the conviction in her voice growing stronger. "He tried to take everything from me. He's not going to win. I'm not going to let him." The police were already on their way, and within hours Lewis was arrested for assault and attempted murder. The shock of it didn't fully hit Suri until she was sitting in the small, quiet room, her hands trembling as she recounted the events that had brought her to this point. But even in the midst of the devastation, there was a sense of clarity. A weight was lifting from her shoulders, and in the silence that followed, she realized someone was there for her in a way she never expected. Chris. He had been there all along, standing in the shadows of her pain, waiting for her to find the strength to stand on her own. And now, as the final pieces of the nightmare clicked into place, Suri understood. The man who truly loved her, who had supported her when everything else was falling apart, wasn't the one she had once trusted. Lewis. It was Chris. The love she had been searching for had been right in front of her the entire time. Her heart, though still broken, felt a flicker of warmth. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't alone. And as she looked at Chris, the man who had stood by her through every storm, she knew that, no matter what the future held, they would face it together. This continuation brings the emotional payoff of the story, with Suri standing firm and ready to face the truth, while also discovering the love and support that Chris had always offered her. If you find this story interesting and want to see more touching, tense, but meaningful situations, don't forget to subscribe to our channel today. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Share this story with your friends and remember to like the video so we can stay motivated to bring you more great and meaningful content. Thank you for watching and supporting us.